All right, through the asynchronous ether of time, space, and digital technology, we have each hit a button and are brought together. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. How is everyone? Welcome, welcome. Thanks for being here. There's kind of a lot to talk about. I got a bunch of emails from you all asking if I saw the article in the New York Times about New York yoga teachers unionizing against YogaWorks. And yes, I saw the article. And yes, I kind of have a lot to say about it. I wrote a lot about it today, and I'm going to talk about it more. I will mention just a few general comments about it on the other side of today's conversation. But I'm not going to get into it right now because today's talk with Timothy Lynch is quite in depth. It's a lengthy conversation, and we get into important topics. I thought a lot about this conversation after we had it, and I just don't want a cursory consideration of unionizing yoga teachers to cloud the very important matters that we attempt to address together. I did feel like it deserved mentioning because I've been entertaining this notion of unionizing yoga teachers with people for years and years. And to see an article in the New York Times and then a tweet from Bernie Sanders about it, I did feel it was very significant. And it does tie into politics, and that's why it's way too much to talk about right here. Like I said, I'll say a little something on the other side. But I do want to set the stage for what you're going to hear. Before I do, real quick, I want to make sure you know about KarmaSoft. And if you've been around, you've heard me talk about it before, and you know what KarmaSoft is. But if you're new, maybe you don't. Either way, if you're somebody who's using MindBody Online and it is getting you down, which I'm sure you're not the only one, KarmaSoft is a studio management software that is the solution to your MindBody Online woes. This is the software that I used when I had my center in Brooklyn. The owner of KarmaSoft, Rudy Senecal, he's been on the show before. I would encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. You can hear the whole origins of the company and the software and how he runs the company and my experience of using it. I found it to be far superior than MindBody on a lot of different levels, and I think that you would do yourself a favor to check it out. So go to karmasoftonline.com. Also, let me drop my stuff real quick. I just got a couple of gigs coming up. I'm going to be at the Yogi Underground in Falls Church, Virginia, October 5th and 6th. I am going to be at the Namaste Festival in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, October 26th. Also, thanks to everybody who emailed me about my Easing the Pain Tour 2020. That has really been developing, and I will be talking about it more. But just to mention here, if you are in Germany, if you're a listener in Germany, I'm looking for a place to do an intensive there. So email me. If you're from Germany and you're listening right now and you might have an alternative space that I could use that we can rent for not too much money, reach out to me, okay? In any case, you can find out about all of my gigs and all my other online video and blog stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, so today's talk with Timothy Lynch came about because a mutual friend of ours, Amy Matthews, who has been on this show many times before. In fact, it was the last time that she was on this show, which was recorded live in Brooklyn, that she turned to me and she said, I think you should go have a practice and talk to Timothy. She sometimes practices with Timothy, and she thought that he was someone that I should meet, and specifically that I should have a practice with him. And I have known Amy for many, many years. I respect her. You hear me mention her. I've learned from her. I really value her work and viewpoint. And she's never said that to me before. The only other time she ever said that to me was when she mentioned Mark Whitwell to me, who was on just a few weeks ago. Amy was the person who said, I think you should go meet this guy. And that's the last time previously that she's ever suggested that I do anything. And then when she turned to me and said, I think you should go have a practice with Timothy, I didn't even ask her why. I didn't even say why. I just said, okay. And I reached out to Timothy, and it meant that I had to drive into New York a day before and sleep on my sister-in-law's couch so that I could get up super early and be at the Shala at 6:30 in the morning for my Mysore practice. And then after I had practice with Timothy, we took the subway out to Brooklyn together, and we sat on a bench along the East River and recorded the conversation that you're going to hear. And you will notice that we are outside on a bench because there are Brooklyn families and kids yelling and stuff happening around us. This is very real. And it took us a little while, but we really locked in. And I think it's significant to note that in the time between Timothy and I originally contacting each other and arranging to get together, and then actually getting together, which there was some weeks in between, Timothy decided to have his name removed from the authorized Ashtanga yoga teacher list. And he sent me an email showing me the post where he was announcing that he had done that publicly. And that happened like just 2 weeks before this conversation takes place. And those of you who've been around know I've been having these conversations about the Ashtanga yoga community and how they're dealing with the revelations of Pattabhi Jois's abuse. And I really think that this conversation with Timothy adds some important nuance. I was very grateful to have had it, and I'm grateful to share it with you today. So with that, I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's just get to it. Let's go to Brooklyn, New York, and sit on a bench along the East River and listen to this conversation that I had with Timothy Lynch. Okay, we're recording.
All right, here we are.
We are sitting at the edge of Brooklyn looking out over the city.
Waterfront.
I'm glad we came here. Actually, it's cool that you suggested it because there are a number of occasions that I'm sort of flashing back to when I lived here and I needed to reflect. There's something about coming here to the edge of where the water is, you know? And so that we've come to do that today seems apropos to reflect.
Yeah, and I think also in line with our conversation on the way here, which is a lot about transformation and change and changes in the yoga world, and this waterfront has gone through many changes over the years, a lot of which we've seen. So, yeah.
Well, let me just tell you that this morning was, I think, the first time I was in a Mysore room in maybe 20 years. And I had an enjoyable experience. Thank you for it. And so I guess, first of all, how long have you been teaching at the Shala?
I've been teaching at the Shala for the Mysore room for a year. But I had taught at the Shala some years ago for maybe 5 or 6 years before moving to California to Oakland for about 4 years. And so I've been back for a couple of years in the city and teaching at the Shala in the Mysore room for just a year.
I see. And so you started here, though, in the city?
Yes. Yeah.
When did you move here?
I moved here in 1998.
Okay.
I went to School of Visual Arts, so I have a degree in fine art. And then I had many years working in the art world for artists and galleries and making my own work and exhibiting. And then at some point slipped into this yoga scene. And then that's kind of been the priority ever since.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, it's good. I didn't do like any research or bio information on you. I normally would, but I wanted to come into the practice experience fresh. So I specifically didn't do any research on you. So I don't know anything about you, really.
Oh, that's good.
All I know is that Amy Matthews said that you were a good person to go practice with, which means a massive amount to me.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you came here in 98, art school.
Art school.
Like a lot of folks discovered yoga in the midst of that, I'm betting?
Yeah.
Was your first yoga experience Ashtanga or something else?
No, my very first yoga experience was at Yoga Sutra on 5th Avenue, I think. It was across from the library.
Okay.
I went to a beginner class there. I wore
Hildebrand?
sweatpants. Hildebrand was there, yeah.
Yeah, right.
I took some beginner class. I don't even know what it was. Some beginner vinyasa class. I had like the extra thick sweatpants on. It was the worst. It was the worst.
See?
Yeah, I was making mistakes from the beginning. That was my very first, and then quickly it was like Jiva Mukti for a while.
That was when it was 2nd Avenue, right?
No, it wasn't actually.
That was Broadway?
That was Broadway.
Okay, so...
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And then once you get to Jiva, like how long did you practice just around like that? I'm saying what happened before you got to Ashtanga is sort of what I'm getting at.
It was kind of a quick thing. Like I feel like I came to practice maybe like a lot of people at that time and a lot of personal struggles, and I was sort of looking for another way. And so I had a lot to burn off, and so a lot of that burning was done at Jiva. And I was in India not long after that. I mean, I feel like I practiced at Jiva for maybe a year and a half or something, and then I was in India for a few months, not practicing yoga at anywhere specific, just getting on buses and going to temples and doing the thing, which I feel like for me that experience taught me more about yoga than any yoga class I've ever taken.
I had the same experience. I went to India for 3 months in 1998, and it was the same thing. I didn't want to stay in an ashram. I just traveled around like you and waiting for trains and having a different relationship to time and coming up against my privilege and being an American. And that really taught me about yoga in a pretty profound way, even more than asana did in some sense.
Yeah. I feel like the way I've always thought about it, it's like there's this vibration, this friction between life and death in India. As you travel around, there's kind of this like buzz. It feels like death is like you can taste it. It seems pretty close. Yeah. And also welcomed into a part of how they live their lives. And not in a way where we kind of put it aside. We put people in cemeteries. In India, people are like paraded through the streets
and burned. You see them burned, yeah. And you can smell it.
Yeah. So it's like there's something about that friction. It's palpable. So that really facilitated a major shift for me psychologically at the time.
I'm flashing on a memory. I traveled with a friend, and there was a moment where we really got ourselves off the tourist track on purpose. And we were traveling through this part of India when we realized, if one of us got sick here right now,
That's it.
I don't know where we would get to. And we actually wrote a thing that says, if either of us dies while doing this trip, we want the other person to have us cremated and to finish the trip carrying the ashes.
I love it.
Like we both signed it and we made a pact.
And right now, sitting on the waterfront, that sounds super dramatic to me.
I know, but
when you're in India,
in the moment, it was
absolutely.
It was a legitimate concern and like a real thing that we did.
Yeah, definitely. I could see it. Yeah, it's a really hard. I still find myself like trying to come to terms with, India being India, while we're here on this waterfront, or whatever it is, we're doing in New York. And it's just like some alternative world, that's so hard to wrap my head around. And it always, I go back and I think like, oh, I know this place. I got this, And then I get off the plane and immediately I'm just, the rug is pulled out. I have no idea what I'm doing. Even if I know what I'm doing, I don't know what I'm doing. There's like some sense of a loss of who I think I am and how I function in the world as soon as I get off the plane. I have to kind of reconfigure in an unexpected way every time I'm there.
So you're at Jiva, and what's interesting to me is this morning when I was practicing in the Mysore room with you, the thing that jumped out to me first and foremost was, oh wow, this is serious-minded. Like, that's the thing. I initially, when I went to Jiva Mukti, I think it was 92 or 93 at 2nd Avenue, it was before Jiva Mukti became a method. And there was all these different teachers. So you had Ashtanga and Iyengar and Shivananda all kind of represented.
Right.
And the Ashtanga component was the thing that I became most interested in initially. Mm-hmm. One, because it seemed the most kick-ass in some regard. It was like the most punk rock of them or something. Yeah. But also because it felt, whether it was true or not, but at the time it felt like, oh, if you wanted to be serious, like I was sort of my temperament as well. So serious-minded, and I went down that road for that reason. What was it about Jiva that made you more interested in Ashtanga? Or was it something else?
I think I kind of fell into Ashtanga. I had learned, like anybody else who practices at Jiva, it's like you learn yoga, it's like they're really teaching yoga there in some profound ways that, maybe we don't find that as much in a lot of other schools. The information is available, let's put it that way. And so it kind of had me, the way I've been thinking about it recently, it's like when I got into this, it's like, this is a practice that has wisdom, action, and devotion, mixed together, interchangeably, these things. So it made sense to me the way my mind always worked, and I'd always been kind of, a little athletic, so I'm always kind of interested in embodying practices, what it is to have that, and to be able to like do a practice that's coupled with, reading texts and also offering, it's an offering, was really kind of an exciting thing to me. So that was kind of sort of the jump off point for me. And so when I was in India, I think it was 2008, I found my way to Mysore, and Pattabhi Jois was still alive, and the shala was full. So I went to practice with another guy, this young guy, Ajay was his name. And so I started with Ajay. It was the first time I had, practiced in a Mysore room.
But you had done Ashtanga practice before that.
Yes, a little bit, but not in a Mysore room, like in a proper setting where I'm practicing, 6 days a week. And so he had asked me, do you know the sequence? And I kind of shook my head, yes, I don't know why I did that. And so, the next thing I knew, he was like, I was in it. It was it. It was, really, I was in it. And so there's something about the absorption of the vinyasa method, and the Trishtana method that's always been really enticing to me.
And would you say that's when your Ashtanga practice started with that guy?
I think so.
The 6 days a week.
The 6 day a week, like I'm a Mysore practitioner. This is what I'm doing.
And have you maintained that since then?
Yeah.
How many years?
Much.
That's like 20 some odd years.
No, it's 11 years.
11 years. That's right. I'm sorry.
11 years. Yeah, it's like such a short time, but it feels like...
That's not a short time to keep going every day, except for moon days, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much...
And so, that's very interesting, though. What do you know what's the relationship between this guy that you studied with down the street and Pattabhi Jois and the Mysore?
Ajay's teacher was BNS Iyengar, not BKS Iyengar. I'm sure you know BNS Iyengar. And I initially, I tried to find BNS Iyengar to study with him. And he had a shala at the time, I think it's closed now, across from Jagan Mohan Palace. And it's this like second floor thing with all these asana sequences framed up on the walls with like gathering cobwebs, and pretty spectacular space actually. But I went there I think maybe 2 or 3 days in a row to practice with him, and he wasn't there. Like I couldn't find him. I don't know what was going on. And So I ran into one of his students, and he said, I don't know if you're going to be able to find him, but there's this young guy, Ajay, and he's a student of BNS Iyengar. Maybe you should practice with him. So then it took me another 2 days to find Ajay, just kind of like, hitting the streets, walking around, asking, where's Ajay? Like, seeing Westerners walking around with yoga mats and saying, do you know this guy Ajay? So finally we found Ajay, and, I practiced with him for... maybe it was a month or something, and he kind of broke me down for sure. It was a lot of... And
was he teaching you the Ashtanga sequence?
Yeah.
Straight?
Yeah, pretty straight. I mean, he had a couple little things, extra things here and there we did to work on the jump throughs and jump backs and some of the back bending. But I mean, within 3 weeks I was jumping back, jumping through. Like, I mean, I can't believe that, it was happening so quickly. But he was on us. He was a good guide for me, I think. In the beginning. It's just a more intimate setting.
That's what I was going to say, because the other room was sold out. By that time, I just had a talk with Guy Donahue, and he talked about how it started. It was like 20 people in the room or less, and then it was like hundreds.
Yeah.
So, wow. So you never, in that trip to India, when you started your Ashtanga practice, you never practiced with Pattabhi Jois at that place?
No. And I actually think of it... So I had that first month or 6 weeks or whatever it was practicing with Ajay, and shortly after I came back home and I had a 10-day Vipassana sit at the Goenka Center in Massachusetts. And I feel like, thinking about what you were saying earlier, like the seriousness, like having that 10-day sit, I think that's actually what prepared me for what having a Mysore practice was going to be. So I always think of it as meditation bringing me to this practice, because I don't know if I would have been able to sit with this practice the way that I was able to for so many years without having that meditation practice and that quality of attention and that quality of seriousness.
It goes to what we were talking about on our way over here, and how I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I just feel that there was a shift where, at that time, even in 2007 and 2008, I guess, although because we also came into it earlier than that, still, like 98 for sure, there was still an air around yoga where it wasn't working out. It felt deep. It felt like you were tapping into something mystical and ancient. And I guess that has pros and cons.
Yeah.
But there was that feeling, and because it just wasn't so commercial yet, that when you showed up, it felt like it had an air about it and a feeling. And I think folks like me and you who are still at it now, that's what we're still doing our darndest to retain.
Yeah. Not easy.
It's become more challenging, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the pretense has, fallen by the wayside. I don't know exactly what, I don't want to point my finger at any particular thing, but there's some feeling that's shifted, there's like, there's definitely a reorganizing and a re-examining what it is to be in these practices and what it is to connect to that mystical, and what that, to what degree do we connect. And, I think some of it's overthinking, honestly. I think a lot of it is, quite often, students ask, like, what's the right way to do this, or is that the right, is this the right, am I doing the right thing? And I don't know what the right thing is, honestly. I mean, maybe I'm going, like, I'm veering into another.
Yeah, no, you're jumping ahead. You're jumping ahead, but absolutely the question about what we're doing and why we're doing it is important. Before we talk about that, though, let's go back, because I want to lay the context for that.
Okay.
Which is how you got to where you are and what your views are.
Yeah.
And frankly, we have to talk about what's happening in the Ashtanga world, because that ties into it as well. So you have this time with this guy, Ajay.
Yeah.
You come back to New York.
Yeah. You're
living in Manhattan?
Was I living in Manhattan? No, Brooklyn. Yeah, actually here in Williamsburg.
In Williamsburg?
Yeah.
All right. I was here. We were both here.
We were both here. Yeah.
And it was still not, there was no Apple Store yet.
There was no,
there was no Apple Store, and you could still kind of afford to live here.
Kind of, yeah.
And were you teaching at that time? When did you start teaching?
I started teaching maybe like 2 years after I started practicing.
Yeah.
I started teaching. I mean, it felt to me like...
Even before you got to Ashtanga?
Even before I got to Ashtanga full on, yeah. It was just this kind of path that was laid out. Like, it made sense to me so quickly, and it had such a transformative effect on who I was and how I saw the world. And I remember walking out of those classes at Jiva and just feeling like some sense of understanding my surroundings and my place in my surroundings in this really powerful
It makes me think about what you said when you said at the beginning of this conversation, when you step off the plane in India, and like these preconceived ideas about who you are or what you are, or these external identifiers are removed. All that's left is like you not defined by those things.
Totally.
And that, I would have a similar feeling, like at that pivotal time in my 20s, early 20s or whatever, I'm trying to figure out who the hell I am.
Right.
And there's so much roles that have been put on me and ideas about life that are sort of put upon us, and to sort of have a practice that would sort of seem to clear the lens.
Yeah.
And then you would step out, like you're describing, and feel like this fresh perspective.
Yeah.
Undefined by all these ideas of our parents and whatever, Yeah, I had the same.
I remember when I was teaching at Go. That was one of the first places that I taught when I started teaching, was at Go.
I left right when you showed up there, I think.
And so I was teaching at Go, and I remember one day I was on my way over to teach, and I saw someone walk out of a class, and she had a yoga mat on her back, and she was on the phone with somebody, and she said, "Oh yeah, I just finished my yoga class." And no, she didn't say class. She said, "I just finished yoga." Mm-hmm. And I thought, no, you're just starting yoga. you just left preparation. That was preparation for like what's happening outside. And I remember just such a strong sense of that. And like, I hesitate to say understanding, because I don't think that I embodied it yet, but I felt it. Like, I felt like, okay, now I'm going to do the yoga. Like, now how do I use the experiences I just had, not to, beat myself up because I wasn't able to do this, or celebrate myself because I was able to do that, but to like integrate, to walk outside and see things, like you're saying, a little more clearly. And I had a strong sense of that from the beginning, I think.
And where do you think that came from? Like, was it a teacher who gave that to you, or your own intuitive sense?
I think it's kind of the way I've always been. I mean, I think part of, I'm a fairly sensitive person, and I maybe for a long time thought that was a weakness, and finding my way to a practice that allowed me to understand it as a strength was just a whole new way of being able to enter into the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that being able to celebrate that sensitivity and to be vulnerable in new ways and to be receptive in new ways was such an appealing thing to me, because I feel like I was always looking for that. You know, I never really found drugs. I never really went down that path, but I feel like I found other ways to kind of harm myself, you know, that were closing me off.
Yeah.
And so this was a way to step into maybe kind of saying fuck you in a way that's like more loving and more healthy and more integrated and more receptive, instead of a shoving away, you know, or a pushing down.
I really relate to that. I've always been very sensitive too, and I think at an earlier time in my life that felt like a liability, like a weakness. But when I got to yoga, that was a great asset.
Yeah.
So it did make me feel, it made this part of me that always felt like something that made me not strong, made me feel like that was a strength.
Yeah.
I totally know what you mean. When you were at Go, what were you teaching? You weren't doing Ashtanga yet. What were you teaching?
No, I was teaching like kind of Ashtanga base, like it was sort of around the Ashtanga sequence.
Vinyasa.
Yeah. No music.
No music.
No music. Yeah. I was
no playlist?
I was never into...
In 2008?
I was never into the music. Yeah. I mean, I think I like maybe played with it a little bit.
And Lilia would let you.
Yeah.
Lilia gave freedom. You know, I always tell the story about, I was doing a more like kind of power vinyasa, Ashtanga based class for a long time, and then I changed what I was doing and shifted to this more Desikachar thing.
Yeah.
And I changed what I was doing, and a lot of people freaked out. Right. And I remember getting called into like Lilia's office to have a conversation, and she asked me, she said, so I heard you're doing a new thing and it's really different and you're kind of doing the same sequence every time. And I just said yes, but I explained to her why. Right. I said, I'm exploring these new ideas and these new teachings from Desikachar. I really feel like for myself personally I need to change what I'm doing, and I'm trying, and I need to do that as a teacher. And she supported me, and she came to my class, and she got it.
Yeah.
And I just don't know that teachers these days could do that, could go to the yoga center owner and not feel pressured in the way that they feel these days, you know?
Yeah, because there's so much talk about numbers.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? I mean, Lilia was really receptive to how I was teaching as well. You know, it's like, I counted really slow. You know, my wife was telling me the other day that she did some training, and one of the people in the training with her was saying, I don't really like Timothy's class because he doesn't really do anything. And I thought that's like kind of the greatest compliment I can receive. It's like, oh, Timothy's not really there, and that's why I don't like his class. Like, perfect. I'm heading in the right direction.
But, okay, so you're teaching a vinyasa practice, sort of Ashtanga inspired, I guess.
Yeah.
You're at Go.
Yeah.
That's before you went and had this time and started your Ashtanga practice?
It's kind of around the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, I started teaching around the same time that I started Ashtanga practice. And to be honest, it was like a little confusing for me from the beginning, because it's like I'm doing this practice and I'm not teaching it. And I also didn't feel ready at all to teach an Ashtanga practice. I mean...
at that time, there was 200-hour certifications, but they hadn't been around as long as they have been now.
Right.
And certainly to teach Ashtanga...
Yeah, it's a whole other thing.
...had a whole other thing.
Yeah.
So, okay, so when does that gap get filled? Like, when do you start to identify as an Ashtanga teacher? I'm assuming at some point, because I know you were authorized, that you studied with Sharad or Patabi Joyce. So when does that happen?
So I was teaching at Go. I started teaching at the Shala around the same time. And, you know, it was Ashtanga-based classes. And I was practicing with Eddie on Broome Street. I practiced with Eddie for several years. And I think that slowly, it just kept feeling a little more and more dishonest for me to be teaching, you know, Ashtanga-based vinyasa classes while I'm doing this other practice. It just became a conflict for me. And so I'd gone to practice with Sharad,
When did you do that?
I'm trying to think of what the first year I went. Maybe 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was 2012.
Was Patabi Joyce still alive?
No, he wasn't alive. And maybe around 2012, yeah. And so the shift just kept, slowly. It was like, there's no music. The sequence I'm teaching gets closer to Ashtanga, to like the primary series.
Your class kept morphing over towards the primary series.
Yeah, like why are we doing Ardha Chandrasana? It's like little things kind of were dropping, and I felt like the students were getting a little more settled into it, a little quieter. It felt like there was a seriousness, the attention that was being paid was getting refined. It was something really felt right to me about that.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.